After observing the four groups that are particularly vulnerable to climate change, there are also five proposed solutions that have been considered in Russia to curb climate change, but these proposed solutions also have trade offs. The first proposed solution is for the government to increase financial commitments that look at ways to research and develop clean energy. However, a large trade off of investing in clean alternative energy instead of fossil fuel could lead to a large negative economic impact for the country of Russia, especially when you keep in mind that Russia accounts for 12% of the total oil production in the world. The Russian government has also spent a significant amount of time researching new oil territories to begin to pull oil from, with generated and guaranteed financial returns. There's little economic incentive for Russia to invest in alternative energy at the face value when they are guaranteed short term economic benefits of increased oil production. The second proposed solution is to regulate deforestation in Russia. However, this can lead to negative effects on the lumber and timber industry. To Russia's credit, they have begun to regulate the lumber industry to fight deforestation, but it is also a large industry, and much like fossil fuel production, is an essential piece of Russia's economy. Illegal logging also is rampant in Russia, and so how much does regulation actually really cut deforestation when it could just encourage illegal logging and deforestation that way? And again, many of these companies are buying lumber from Russia do not take into serious consideration and think about the origin of the wood that they purchased. So, a lot of times, if it's not in front of your face, if climate change, you don't see it every day, it's a more of a slow trend. Many people are not going to feel incentivized with deforestation to cut down less trees when that can satisfy their needs today and they're not thinking about their needs of tomorrow. The third proposed solution is to invest in a new energy efficient infrastructure and improve existing roads. However, money doesn't grow on trees, and a lot of this emissions and all this other things that are going on in Russia, it won't just be easy to invest in new infrastructure because the capital simply is not there. Bad roads can lower the fuel efficiency of vehicles, and energy efficient roads would lead to reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. However, if you look at it, the other flip side of it, building new roads require a lot of cement, which is a key source for greenhouse gas emissions. In 2005, the U.S. alone produced 50.7 million tons of carbon dioxide from cement production. And since constructing new roads and upgrading the old ones require a large financial budget, the Russian government has no economic incentive to deal with that over other problems that are more pressing in their economy every day. So, with this being said, building a new infrastructure and roads would be great if the money was there, but at the same time, would the environmental impact actually get worse or would it get better? Another proposed solution is that Russia has begun to put serious effort to limit pollution. They've been taking into consideration how smoke and pollution can lead to global warming. They were skeptic for a long time, as we'll get into this presentation, but they have begun to take the first steps to maybe look at how they can grapple climate change. Russia is wasting at least $3.6 billion a year by burning off valueless fuels, and they have a plan to reduce pollution as much as 25% by 2030. But if you look at the flip side of it, as the environmental group WWF points out, it will be difficult to get emissions under control without flaring, which generates about 10% of Russia's pollution. Since one of Russia's primary exports is oil, they cannot meet the expense of cutting back on flaring for coming years. And since supporting money for flaring would cost a lot of money, Russia will face a challenge to invest enough money to actually make it worth it. Another proposed solution is Russia is looking for ways and supporting funds for research and developing innovative technologies that prevent climate change that is not welcomed by certain people, because it takes away attention from improving current economic benefits. So, Russia is faced every day with different, more visible economic concerns than climate change. It would be easier for these politicians to solve those than it would be to solve climate change, even if climate change is a bigger risk. So major research fields are environmentally friendly, and many of these are based on energy efficiency, on renewable energy sources and technology that generates less greenhouse gases. The government is promoting economic and social development programs in some ways, and eventually it could pay off since it is easier and cheaper than to prevent that than fixing climate change after it's already had a serious impact. But if you look at the flip side of that, the government funding is limited. Spending in one area means cutting back from other areas. They could be spending in different areas that many citizens value, such as medical research.
Talking about the evolution of climate change in Russia. Now I'm going to talk about Russia's involvement in the UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol.
Russia signed to join the UNFCCC, otherwise known as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, on June 13th of 1992. They ratified acceptance and approval on December 28, 1994, and officially became a member on March 28 of 1995. Russia is included in the Annex I parties, which are classified as a group of developed and industrialized countries. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the newly formed Russian Federation focused on economic development and industrialization. These focuses are one of the main reasons Russia signed to join the UNFCCC 6 short months after the fall of the Soviet Union. The Kyoto Protocol was approved by the UNFCCC in 1997. However, Russia did not sign it until 2 years later in 1999. Russia's main contribution to the Kyoto Protocol was ratifying it and bringing it into effect in 2005, satisfying its 55% clause. Russia, along with other Annex I countries, decided to not take place in Kyoto anymore in 2011. Before Russia signed on to the Kyoto Protocol in 1999, they were involved in a few other groups, namely the Long Range Transboundary Air Pollution Group, also known as LRTAP. Keep in mind that this is the Soviet Union at this point in time and not the Russian Federation. The Soviet Union is actually one of the founding countries of LRTAP in 1979, which still exists today with 51 countries now participating in it. The LRTAP's mission is to regulate the emissions of 22 harmful chemicals among the countries that are involved. The LRTAP is known as being one of the main driving forces to create the Kyoto Protocol. Another agreement in Russia during the pre-Kyoto time period was an agreement on cooperation in environmental protection. It was an agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union that focused on climate conservation in both countries. It also played a major role in ending the Cold War. After the United States and Australia exited the Kyoto Protocol in the early 2000s, it was needed of Russia to ratify the treaty, or else the Kyoto Protocol would cease to exist. A little look at the fine print shows that Russia was not originally a supporter of the Kyoto Protocol. Also, Russia had performed human rights violations, which included the mishandling of indigenous people in their land. In order to make other G20 countries look the other way on their human rights violations, Russia had to agree to sign to the Kyoto Protocol. Russia exited the Kyoto Protocol in 2012 after no real action was ever taken since joining in 2004. The president of Russia is Vladimir Putin. One of his first acts of presidency was to eliminate Gashko Kalamagia, which means the State Committee of Environmental Protection. Putin wanted less emphasis on climate change education during schooling in Russia. Just to put this into perspective, in 2003, 81% of Russians have never heard of the Kyoto Protocol, while 83% of British citizens had. Putin does not trust environmentalists either, because he believes that they are sent by governments to sabotage Russia's oil supply. A few notable quotes from Putin on climate change are, "Climate change is good, but people will spend less on fur coats. Global warming is a fraud. It is not topical for the people of Russia. And climate change will cause our grain production to increase, and thank God for that." Joint implementation is a carbon market scheme that allows countries to generate a carbon credit for amounts of greenhouse gases that they remove from the atmosphere. The country is then allowed to sell this carbon credit to a country so that they would not have to reduce their emissions. The business aspect of joint implementation is that the emissions are reduced cost efficiently and effectively, and it allows for foreign investment. Russia specifically has 4 major factories that capture their waste emissions, condense them, and then destroy them. Russia's emissions are then reduced by the process, and they are able to sell off their carbon credit to turn a profit. An interesting fact about this is actually that Russia accounts for about 2/3 of all carbon credits sold. This pie chart shows the percentage of carbon credits sold by each country specifically. You can see how Russia clearly has sold the most carbon credits, at about 60%, or almost two-thirds of all carbon credits sold. As mentioned before, Russia was one of the main reasons the Kyoto Protocol went into effect. The Kyoto Protocol called for emissions to be reduced below their 1990s levels. Well, because Russia is able to cut its emissions rate so immensely due to the fact that the Soviet Union was highly energy insufficient, Russia stands to make about $10 billion through the joint implementation process. No other country can even come close to reducing their emissions by this much. Russia has multiple ways to reduce their emissions by diversifying their energy sources. A few examples of this are solar, wind, and geothermal energy, with geothermal energy being the most abundant renewable source in Russia. Geothermal energy results in more than half of the economic potential that Russia has.
Thank you for watching our presentation. After all that you've seen, these are our final recommendations for Russia's future with climate change.
First recommendation: create and intensify policies regulating an emission amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that companies and individuals contribute. Another means, heavy taxes on polluters or give incentives to less polluters. For instance, green taxes. As one author say, pay as you burn, not pay as you earn. Emission taxes are rated to the amount of emissions and extent of environmental damage called Pigouvian taxes. Indirect taxes on purchasing production goods which harms the environment. Deduction or lower taxes for production that save energy and reduce pollution. Second recommendation: carbon credit. Carbon credit means a permit that allows a country or organization to produce a certain amount of carbon emissions, and that can be traded if the full allowance is not used. There are two types of carbon credits that are tradable in a financial market. First, Renewable Energy Certificates REC or green tax. Second, Chicago Climate Exchange CCX. Benefits of carbon credits are: firms can earn credits by reducing their greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, below emission quota. Permit holders are allowed to emit greenhouse gases. Total greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will be reduced. Economic and environmental benefits to Russia. Third recommendation: investment on alternative natural energy and green technology. Allocate budget to develop natural energy and green technology or raise funds to help development. Transition from traditional fossil fuel to new clean renewable energy. Expand energy sources to wind, solar, water, geothermal, biomass, etc. Apply green technologies to produce non-toxic environmental friendly products including new efficient energy, green building, green chemistry, and green nanotechnology. Benefits include sustainability, less carbon emission, and environmental protection for current and next generation. Fourth recommendation: educate people to be aware of the climate change effects and ways of prevention. Allocate budget to start an education program to bring awareness of the public and to encourage them to make environmental friendly decisions. Benefits include reduced vulnerability to harm effects and disasters due to climate change. Research has been proving that rising GDP has not reduced the number of deaths due to climate change related disasters, while education has. Improve adaptation to climate change. Encourage people to make decisions for the environment, such as taking public transportation and using energy efficient products.
Our final action plan that we're putting in place to implement our recommendations are based on the action plan that is actually being adapted at COP21 right now in Paris. What it will call for is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 70% of 1990 levels by 2030. We'll push for a joint implementation strategy that will implement carbon credits shared between the countries of the UNFCCC as well as financed by them in a proportional manner. It will then call for a UNFCCC-wide carbon credit program incentivizing countries to reduce emissions with a financial incentive per metric ton through 2030. Then these carbon credits will be redistributed in three ways. The first way is 33% will be invested by Russian carbon credits into a business incentive program, giving businesses for each proven metric ton of CO2 reduction a credit. It will then invest 33% of carbon credits into research that looks at ways to innovate into cleaner energy and emissions reduction. The third way, 33%, will be invested to assist with indigenous people to reclaim their land caused by the inefficient use of overindustrialization. The cost-benefit analysis of the action plan, there's a few potential costs. First, the tourism industry will be negatively affected. As ice coverage melts and temperatures rise slightly, Russia has experienced a significant boom in their tourism industry that may be hard to give up. Also, a lack of accountability may mean that carbon credits aren't actually reinvested properly. Russia has had an issue in the past with accountability, and the joint implementation process from 2008 to 2012 was ineffective in 2015 due to 73% of the projects being intangible to produce. So it's important that those revenues are generated towards the right companies and the right businesses that mean well, but how to find that will be potentially a cause of an issue. Also, Russian greenhouse gas emission levels are hard to track as they were during the Soviet Union. It's hard to tell how much greenhouse gas emissions are actually being cut because there's nothing to compare it to, because during the Soviet Union a lot of these numbers were kept under wraps. There's also perceived social costs, such as the political party of Vladimir Putin, United Russia, has been against many climate change initiatives supporting real change. Also, women and indigenous people may still struggle to get the representation needed to make any real change due to populations being so spread out. As we spoke about before, indigenous people make up 2/3 of the land coverage in Russia. Also, tracking what businesses are truly reducing carbon emissions may be hard to actually depict without significant accountability. With that being said, there's conflicts that arise with our plan. That's why we have a conflict reduction action plan put in place as well. We will create a task force that ensures that carbon credits are being awarded to companies in an accurate manner. This means investing in technology that will make this product more efficient and accurate. Also, encouraging businesses to use carbon credits to build new production areas that are more energy efficient. And energy companies have played a large role in putting women and indigenous people into vulnerable situations. This is where we need to create a task force of prominent female rights, indigenous people, and energy company representatives that must come up with 3 tangible ways to de-escalate vulnerability to these indigenous people and to women and to poor people by 2020. Energy companies need Russia and will be more than willing to work towards a deal if there's penalties put on the line.
Russia's best concept that exemplifies justice and equality is through the carbon credit scheme, also known as joint implementation. Just a quick reminder on the carbon credit scheme. It allows firms to earn carbon credit for reducing their greenhouse gas emissions below their 1990s level, which they are then allowed to sell. This, in turn, will allow for the overall greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced. Russia has the ability to make about $10 billion from this scheme. The money that is earned from it could then be used to improve Russia's style of living. Also, it will overall improve its economy immensely. A few of the vulnerable groups to climate change in Russia include the indigenous people and women. The indigenous groups that inhabit Russia are the Burats, the Mari, and the Chulums. Climate change will alter everything, including weather patterns, food production, and people's lifestyles. The climate change may call for them to leave where they are living. It also will affect their finances and education. For women, it is important to note that they do not have an equal opportunity or voice as men. With that being said, it is hard for women to be involved in climate change talks and movements. Women will have a hard time adjusting and sustaining their current lifestyles with the new environment after the climate change has hit because they will be unprepared. The carbon credit scheme will have a positive effect on the vulnerable groups in Russia. For indigenous groups, the money that would be earned would improve their style of living. Specifically, the Burats rely heavily on the fishing industry as one of its styles of living. The fishing industry is currently on the decline due to pollution and carbon emissions. The carbon credit scheme will reduce the emissions and will improve the fishing industry. Women also stand to gain a lot from the carbon credit scheme. The money that would come from the carbon credit scheme would allow Russia to build more companies and improve its economy. More companies would put more women in powerful positions, which would allow them to gain a voice in Russia's important matters, including climate change from there on out.